We will be starting here in 5 minutes. I do, of course. For those of you that have missed it, the price is $10 for adult. Men's room is the second door on the left, and the women's room is right here. We pay at the end because we don't want you to have to carry around bags and bags and stuff during the tour. So we may as well just do all of it. And we'll meet right here. Feel free to wander up as far as that. Walk, drink, over to the end. Again, good afternoon and welcome to Yerkes Observatory. I'm Dreiser, one of about a dozen people who work here still. And this is still part of the University of Chicago's Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics. However, they announced in the first week of March that on October 1st of this year, they will be no longer supporting Yerkes Observatory. None of us are absolutely certain what that means. Actually, a lot of people are pretty sure what it means. We won't be closing our doors. We may be closing them temporarily as the new ideas prove fruitful and we somehow manage to continue. We are doing some really important things here, not so much in terms of science. We haven't been doing science in a good 2 decades because of 2 reasons. We're in southern Wisconsin. All too often, the weather night and day is like this. And secondly, our telescopes just aren't big enough. And if you come over this way with me for a minute, bigger telescopes, anything bigger than your eye, actually has better resolution. Literally, the ability to see in between stars. So the Hubble Space Telescope is almost, but not quite, 100 inches in diameter, and it's not looking through the blurring atmosphere. It can see these beautiful images, which are in fact, oddly enough, not terribly scientifically important. They are a hook to make you and me get excited about the universe. The professional astronomers will be examining the same things, but trying to figure out answers to questions. How big, how far away, what's it made of, is it coming toward us and moving away from us? What's its color and temperature? Much more stuff like that. Still, these are absolutely amazing pictures. I know when I was growing up, the Horsehead Nebula was something that looked a little like a horse head in dark clouds in black and white photos, and I found it rather boring. But look at the way Hubble reveals it. Much more complicated than anyone imagined. Another thing, I remember this picture because I believe they called it the mice galaxies. Back when this picture was first shown as a blurry picture taken with a large telescope somewhere on Earth, probably the Hale telescope, 200 inches in diameter, you could see 2 blurry black and white galaxies, but you could not see those 6 galaxies. One of them is spiral, but edge on. That one nearly face on, like this one. You couldn't see that one and 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 that one. There are more galaxies in this picture than there are stars. Furthermore, since the earliest pictures in black and white were taken of objects like this, we no longer speak of irregular galaxies. Used to be there were elliptical galaxies, spiral galaxies, and irregular galaxies. Someone pointed out calling an irregular galaxy an irregular galaxy is like calling a smashed up 1964 Ford Galaxy 500 something different from being a 1964 Ford Galaxy 500. It's the same, it just happens to have gotten smashed up. Here, 2 galaxies got too close together, enormous, trillions of miles long arms of stars and gas and dust are stretched away from interaction, which takes millions of years. So, right at this moment, our own galaxy, we call it the Milky Way Galaxy. The fact that it is a spiral was proven here at Yerkes Observatory using a telescope beginning when it was 40 years old already. One person began studying the Milky Way. This is the only picture that's not a Hubble Space Telescope picture. This is far better than you could ever see the Milky Way. And there are probably 2 reasons why you'll never see it like this. One, I believe it was taken south of the equator. And secondly, your eyes can't see with this kind of resolution.
And they can see the Magellanic Clouds from
They
the southern.
They can see two reasonably close galaxies, not that any galaxies are really close. In fact, that's why, in addition to the first two reasons I pointed out, we're in southern Wisconsin where the weather's not great and it's too cold or too hot and humid, and our telescopes aren't large enough, the University of Chicago wants to spend money on new telescopes that are bigger. And they are doing this right now. In the next 5 years, they will have completed 4 mirrors and put them together. Imagine a quarter in the palm of your hand surrounded by 6 quarters, total of 7. Imagine that they're ground into a parabolic shape, similar to a makeup mirror or a shaving. I don't know what a shaving mirror is, not really, but I've heard they exist. These kinds of mirrors are what telescopes can be made of. And today, the two ways of making big telescopes are either putting together roughly hula hoop-sized hexagons into a big hexagon shape that's carved into a perfect parabola, maybe with even a little bit of tilt control so you can make sure it's all perfectly lined up, or by using multiple mirrors. The University of Chicago is a member of the consortium building that new giant telescope in Chile, in the Atacama Desert, which is about the best place on Earth to build an observatory or a telescope, because it's so elevated and the air is so thin and dry. That telescope, with its 7 28-foot mirrors, will have 4 of them in place, probably the center and 3 equidistant from each other, but don't quote me, I don't know, I haven't looked at their website in over a year, in the next 5 years. They will have the equivalent of an 80-foot telescope, half of an 80-foot telescope. So they'll get the resolution of an 80-foot telescope, even though it's more or less equivalent to half a telescope, even though it's sort of strangely a half a telescope.
When is that supposed to be completed?
As funding permits, and I am not privy to that sort of stuff, but I do know they have just finished the 5th spin cast mirror done under the University of Arizona football stadium in the Stewart Mirror Laboratories. It's an amazing thing. It's such a better idea to spin cast a mirror than make a big glass blank and carve away everything that isn't the shape. Oh, Giant Magellan Telescope. And I encourage you not to remember Giant Magellan Telescope. I further encourage you and beseech you and hope that you will not go look on your smartphones or your home computers. Do not look up Giant Magellan Telescope. If you look under the GMC, you will know more than I do, because I haven't looked for about a year. But I have it on the finest authority from one of the bigwigs who's part of the program that it'll be the next 5 years. We'll have suddenly, just as with Hubble 26 years ago or so, suddenly we learned brand new things about the universe that nobody had imagined. Every time a bigger telescope's built, that's what happens. And it happened in 1897 here at Yerkes Observatory, when one astronomer, a person whom I consider to be the most important modern scientist of all time, just about, George Ellery Hale, managed to persuade Charles Tyson Yerkes, a Chicago millionaire, a robber baron, the most hated man in Chicago, to pay for first the discs of glass and the telescope, and finally the entire observatory, which cost Charles Yerkes 0.1% of his total known income, which happens to have been back then about $500,000. Well, today the University of Chicago, nor anyone else, can afford to. George Ellery Hale, almost single-handedly, they're in the wrong order. George Ellery Hale almost single-handedly built the world's largest telescopes 4 times in a row. This was the first big telescope, the Great Refractor. In fact, during part of the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, it was shown to the public for the first time, with a couple of plaques on it, one of which said what a sweetheart Charles Yerkes was. He badly needed some good publicity. Charles Tyson Yerkes certainly didn't care about science. He cared that he'd be paying for the biggest telescope in the world. At 40 inches, we had the biggest telescope anywhere. The biggest in the world had been at Lick Observatory on Mount Hamilton above San Jose in Southern California. That telescope and observatory were very primitive compared to this place. They had office spaces, and they had the biggest telescope in the world, beginning in 1888 for 9 years. We came along and we had an observatory which was much better equipped with lens grinding facilities and mirror grinding facilities and dark rooms and offices and places, many places with slate optical benches from which we could conduct scientific experiments, keep everything perfectly level. The days of adding wood shims and piling things on books were gone. It was the most modern, best equipped observatory in the world. But George Ellery Hale, in addition to building the world's biggest telescopes 4 times, persuading millionaires to pay for them, also built 3 of the most modern, best equipped observatories in the world. This was the first. Then he managed to persuade Andrew Carnegie to pay for the new Mount Wilson Solar Observatory above what had been a sleepy little town called Pasadena. Hale helped start what is now known as the California Institute of Technology, based on the school MIT that Hale had graduated from. And while there, Hale managed to persuade millionaires, Andrew Carnegie, who had made his money in the steel business, to pay, and then an LA businessman named John Hooker, to pay for a 60-inch reflector telescope using a curved mirror. And then Hooker helped pay for most of a 100-inch telescope, which would remain the biggest in the world for a full 30 years. In fact, Hale had died before a bigger telescope was built. Those are both still on Mount Wilson, or I should say at the Mount Wilson Solar Observatory on Wilson's Peak. The fact that Hale started Caltech University made the city explode and created lighting pollution problems. So in a sense, he's responsible for some of the light pollution problems. And somehow, by the 1920s, Hale persuaded millionaire number 4, Charles Yerkes, who made his money in the transportation business. He did the elevated trains in Chicago. Well, he didn't do them, but he purchased 4 separately owned ones and tied them all together by 1897. Yerkes was followed by Andrew Carnegie, who made his money in the steel industry, followed by John Hooker, who was a hardware magnate of some sort. And then John D. Rockefeller paid for a brand new observatory hundreds of miles away from the Wilson's Peak location above Pasadena. It would be built in another Southern California location above San Diego in the Palomar Mountains. And that 200-inch telescope would be the largest in the world, but not completed until 9 years after Hale had died. It had been interrupted by, among other things, the Great Depression, major flooding at the New York Finger Lakes region where the Corning Glassworks company is, a broken first 200-inch disc. It cracked because it cooled too quickly. But mainly it was the Great Depression and finally the Second World War. Hale had been dead since 1938. But when they finally got its first light in 1947, the 200-inch, now called Hale telescope, would be the biggest in the world until, I'm trying to remember how long. 1993, I think, but don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. So, Hale built the world's biggest telescopes 4 times, and it's called the Hale Telescope in his honor. So here at Yerkes Observatory, this is where the grad students used to come and learn all about astrophysics. A list of all the people that have gone through here reads like who's who of modern astrophysics. People like Gerard Kuiper came here, and at a time when it was terribly unfashionable to study the moons and the planets and our own moon, and asteroids and comets. They were considered the detritus of the solar system. Astronomers were far more keenly interested in studying galaxies and the universe and figuring out all manner of things. Kuiper remained keenly interested in the moon and a lot of things like meteorites. In fact, NASA hired him to make lunar maps, the best that had ever been made, and atlases. Without those, NASA would never have been able to send satellites to the moon and have landers land on the moon and ultimately have human beings land on the moon. So Gerard Kuiper, who was apparently abrasive and had no sense of humor, a fellow who, much against the feelings of the faculty of the University of Chicago, would basically hire anyone who was qualified to do the job, whether it was a 16 or 17-year-old to work in the darkroom or someone to do some of the data reduction. The University of Chicago did not like that. So Gerard Kuiper was one of the important people, but so was, after whom the Hubble Space Telescope is named, Edwin P. Hubble. Edwin P. Hubble graduated from here in 1917, and they named the great telescope in the space after him, the Hubble Space Telescope, after he was long dead. He had used Hale telescopes to make two, arguably, the most important discoveries ever in astronomy. The Chandra X-ray telescope is named for Subramanian Chandrasekhar, better known as Chandra, because Subramanian Chandrasekhar is quite a mouthful, I guess, to us Westerners. He was, among other things, Carl Sagan's advisor when Carl Sagan graduated from here. And Chandra taught here for many, many years, received the 1983 Nobel Prize in Physics. NASA named the X-ray telescope, again posthumously, after Chandra. Many, many, many other people went through these halls in our last 121 years. So at the moment, there was a satellite named for Compton, a University of Chicago physicist, which I don't think exists anymore. So that's 3 satellites or space telescopes. And in the next 90 days, the Eugene Parker Solar Probe, heavily shielded so it can actually get close to the sun, I don't know how close, will be launched. And it is in an abrupt turnabout for NASA. It's being named for someone who's still alive, last time I checked. He's 90 or 91. Eugene Parker came up with the concept of the solar wind being emitted by the sun in every direction, some of which hits the north and south magnetic poles of the Earth and create auroral activity and lots of other things going on. So NASA decided to name it after him, even though he's not dead yet. I think that's very kind of them. So here at Yerkes, the whole building cost $500 million. The interior is all a style called Beaux-Arts, not bizarre, Beaux-Art. That style was popularized during the Columbian Exposition, and all this beautiful plaster work cast by a firm in Chicago. The exterior, and we're going to go out there, was all done by the Terracotta and Tile Company of Crystal Lake, Illinois. The plant is still there, but they no longer do terracotta. That became unfashionable not too long after the Art Deco period. Inside, we have owls without stretched wings. We're not exactly sure what the owls signify. There are owl heads in between these long-eared mustachioed creatures who, I believe, with their alternating handlebar mustaches and straight mustaches, I thoroughly believe that they are deliberate caricatures of Charles Tyson Yerkes. Charles Tyson Yerkes got to hire the architect. Charles Tyson Yerkes was the general contractor. I imagine if there were kickbacks to be made, Charles Yerkes paid for himself out of his own funds. Why would Charles Yerkes be portrayed as a faun, satyr, or satyr? Mythological beings, goat from the waist down, human from the waist up with goat horns and a goat tail. Such creatures like Pan, like Bacchus, like Mr. Tumnus from Chronicles of Narnia, like Grover Underwood from Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief series, were said to have been fond of wine, women, and song. And I know for a fact Charles Yerkes was quite a womanizer. I'm not sure about the song and the wine bit, but his art collection is mostly owned by the Art Institute of Chicago because he spent so much time there. So all of this is exquisitely done in a style which nobody tries to create anymore. I did, before we go outside, want to talk about these 4 designs. Swastika, Jingle Bell, Six-Sided Star, and Flower. They're found 8 times in that collection of the wall. Our swastika has a square in it. It was here 30 years before the National Socialist Party outright stole a version, the swastika, that had been used for thousands of years, primarily by Jain, Buddhist, and Hindi. Everyone used it, but they're the primary ones that did large works of art with big swastikas. The Nazis stole it. Their versions are backwards to ours. Ours has a square in the middle. That's an image of the sun. There are many images of the sun. Some of them are obvious, like the sun overhead in stained glass. And some of them we're not quite sure. The lion heads probably represent the sun. The head of the lion being the sphere of the sun, its mane being the rays. But ultimately no one knows, because before dying, the architect, hired by Charles Yerkes, who also did the American Athletic Association building in Chicago in Italian Gothic, which is similar to the interior here. It has the same marble walls and a similar set of steps. The exterior is all Italian Gothic here. Henry Ives Cobb did the University of Chicago in English Gothic, so it would look a lot like Oxford and Cambridge, and maybe the brand new university would take off if it looked like an ancient. It seems to have been done very, very well for itself. Well, Charles Yerkes may have asked the architect to put as many faces of himself, Charles Yerkes, everywhere as possible, which could neatly explain why there are 256 faces, half of whom have curly handlebar mustaches, the other half of whom have straight mustaches. So are they really Charles Yerkes? We don't know, but they look a little bit like him. Okay, our swastika, an image of the sun. Next to it, a jingle bell or a sleigh bell for no apparent reason, which by mysterious coincidence was to be the title of my book on the architectural detail. I had hoped to get the book published before I retired on November 1st of last year. It was really September 1st. We took the University of Chicago 2 months to acknowledge it. Meanwhile, I kept coming in and getting paid, so I didn't care. I did not get the book published before I retired. Now I'm hopeful I'll get it published before October 1st. It's not likely, but stranger things have happened. The original title was to be, for no apparent reason, The Art and Architecture of Yerkes Observatory. My wife hates it, my boss hates it, so I'm not sure what I'll do. Anyway, the jingle bell could refer to sleigh bells and jingle bells and horse-drawn sleighs in the wild, wonderful, wacky winter weather here at Yerkes Observatory. But no one really knows. There are 5 varieties found, 4 of them are outside. Then we have a 6-sided star, but it has 6 circles surrounding it and a 6-sided pyramid in the middle. It's a very old design. It's not a Jewish star. It's not a star of David. And I'm only pointing this out because I didn't want any of you asking me why we have a Jewish star next to a Nazi swastika, which used to be the most asked question. Any questions about anything so far? Yes.
Did I miss when you said why did they choose here?
Oh, I did not mention why they chose here. The actual full-length tour takes about 9 hours. So sometimes
So I have to come back to that one.
Yeah, you would. I might or might not mention it at the 2 o'clock. The reason we're here, there are about 5 reasons. First of all, Hale wanted to build on a mountaintop. He knew about Lick Observatory and the great observing there at a higher, drier place with less severe winters and summers. The University of Chicago trustees said, it has to be within 100 miles of Chicago. Secondly, someone donated about 52 acres to the new University of Chicago. Thirdly, it's reasonably clear here night and day, and during the day, Hale wanted to study the sun. And among his achievements, he had invented a way of doing that. He led the road towards studying the sun without damaging your eyes or setting anything on fire. Those are important considerations. And finally, we're here because, not quite finally, you could get from Chicago here in 2 hours, from Chicago to Lake Geneva to here. The train station no longer exists, the track's so long gone. But you could, up to the 1960s. And we're in this lovely area above Geneva Lake, which you can no longer see because the foliage is now blocking it, but it's just down the hill. And Geneva Lake is where the elite of Chicago built their summer mansions after the Great Fire of 1871. It's considered the Newport of the West, don't you know? So we have the Maytags and the Schwinns and the Wrigleys and Sears of Sears and Roebuck, and many, many more living right down the hill from us. I don't know if they envisioned going around with buckets getting donations, but they may well have thought of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, let's go on outside. It's not that horrible a day. And what I'd like you to note right away is the fact that the two columns on your left each have the same thing 3 times. Capricorn the goat, Capricorn the goat, Capricorn the goat. And this entire set of columns designs look completely different from the ones here. But as you come out, you will, for example, note that underneath Taurus, the bull, all 12 signs of the zodiac are here, are what looks to me to be a caricature of Charles Tyson Yerkes as a fawn satyr. And in between, Virgo the Virgin, Taurus, Virgo, Charles Yerkes, Pisces the fish, and so forth. You'll find the same things over here. The architect took that 3-part column, rotated it about 180 degrees, and put it facing this way. In this way, all of you observers, or anyone, can see all of the 52 designs without having to move around too much. Also, if the architect had used that same bunch here, it would have just been boring. It would have been a repetition. I think these are caricatures of Charles Tyson Yerkes, watching you as you leave, and as you go out, what used to be the original front entrance, and start walking down toward the lake. Because they're rotated 180 degrees, there are 3 faces here watching you go away. And we have these faces, which look somehow more realistic. And 2 more up there, and 2 more up there. So each side is a total of 18 images of Charles Tyson Yerkes. All his life, George Hale wanted to study the sun and try to figure out how it stars birds, the sun being the closest star to us. It's out there somewhere, I'm just not sure where at the moment. It'll come back by June, I think. The point is, over the entranceway, in order to indicate we wanted to study the sun, we put Helios, the sun god. This is a copy of an original found by the grave robber and father of modern archaeology, Heinrich Schliemann, the German archaeologist. He had discovered the ruins of Troy while digging illegally, as it were, in Turkey. And he also discovered the gold of Troy, which found that Troy was supposed to have worn. And he took the original, which looked like this, carved in marble, back with him to Berlin. I should say he smuggled it out of Turkey, because he did. He made some amazing discoveries, and he spoke many languages, and he was quite an interesting fellow. Our version is more three-dimensional than the original. We replaced broken pieces, part of a horse's face and the horse hooves that had stuck out. And we also threw in 6 winged angels and surrounded it by 4 different varieties of jingle bells for no reason. And Roman fasces, oddly shaped instead of being upright, in an arch on which there are 17 little owls. The owls are creatures of Athena, goddess of wisdom, which is where this was found, so maybe there's a connection there. This is all done in terracotta, flower pot material, and it was here beginning in 1896. They thought it would take 1 year to complete. It took 2 years. The most commonly asked about person on the columns is the man with the big nose. You can see him just above the jingle bell. And if you look carefully, you'll notice there's something missing about the nose. Originally, it is not Pinocchio telling a fib. It is not Cyrano de Bergerac. It is not anyone you may be familiar with by the way he looks, but this is the way he looks. There was a wasp on the nose. We have 2 pictures in the known universe showing what had been evident to anyone who walked in beginning in 1896 rather, because all of this was completed. We didn't have dedication until like 1897. There's a wasp on the nose, and that wasp appears to be someone being stung for money. We think that's what it means. And the logical person being stung for money would have been, because it looks so much like him, John D Rockefeller. Add to that the apparent fact that when John D. Rockefeller came for a visit to see his university 10 years after paying for it, around 1901. He visited Chicago, and then he came up here to look at the new Yerkes Observatory just a few years after it had been completed. Just before he came, George Ellery Hale, who was still director at the time, asked a worker to chisel off all the wasps. So they're gone now, but it looks a lot like John D. Rockefeller. And apparently Rockefeller never heard the story or was not insulted because when Hale asked Rockefeller to pay for a brand new observatory in the 1920s, Rockefeller agreed. So all 12 signs of the zodiac are there. The man in the moon with an oversized star, I think, is Abe Lincoln. If you have a U.S. cent in your pocket, take a look at profile and see what you think. Why would we have Abe Lincoln here at Yerkes? Well, because we're from the land of Lincoln, you see. There are a lot of mysteries here. The exterior is Italian Gothic, and that ties in with the large winged lion. We have 5 of them scattered rather randomly around the building. You can see the winged lion is sitting on his haunches with his claw and his shield and his wine, which presumably stands for Yerkes. Each side has 2 more varieties of much smaller winged lions. One of them is up here, above a shield with what look like Henry Ives Cobb's initials. The other is above a shield with some tools of the architect. Tools may be some of the Freemasons use, but that is not a Freemason. Go online and you can find all the Freemason symbols. Just, you cannot find your secret symbols. It's very secret. But that is not the standard circle compass, the drawing compass above a capital G, above a circle. That's 2 pair of drawing compasses, a T-square and a right triangle. And we have 2 little eye-shaped frog plates above me here. They just happen to be sticking out of the scrollwork with fish tails. And always to the right of them, we have a bird-faced leviathan, one of whose flippers actually comes all the way around and back out. This is the kind of thing no sane person could have ever dreamt of, but the architect did. And on the inside, instead of being in the same order, we have 3 scrolls in a row, and only the 3rd scroll of the 3 has the 2 frog faces sticking their noses, always with on the right side of them, a leviathan with a bird head. I think the bird head snapped out of that. We also have, or the beak heads. We also have 4 dwarves, like the one up here and the one up there, completed 30 years before Walt Disney's Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. They still have the same curious dwarf hats. And one of them is pointing and shouting, and the other is one of them is shouting, one of them is pointing. The one who's pointing has lost his finger, and in some cases his entire fist, because of wonderful Wisconsin weather. The one who's shouting is holding a telescope, or was, sticking out, but it's snapped off too. So there is some damage to the building. We fully expect we will be here a year from now, or 20 years from now. Education outreach is the most important thing we're doing. And at the moment, we're in the middle of a program called iData, or iData, which is teaching astrophysics to the seeing impaired and the blind. A remarkable idea whose time has come. And the results of that will filter down into mainstream education. And for years, we've been working with not only the Wisconsin School for the Seeing Impaired and Blind, but also the Wisconsin School for the Hearing Impaired and Deaf community in Delaware. So we're doing lots of education outreach, which is not what the University of Chicago is all about. They told us years ago we could do it if we managed to figure out how to pay for it. We've done that. They're not paying for it. They are keeping the building going, at least through October 1st. So we have phases of the moon. They're not in the right order. The one that's asleep is a new moon, because the new moon is out there during the day. You're just not aware of it. And if they're caricatures, we haven't figured them out. Oh, I forgot to mention the guy with the smiling face. He's important. The fellow with the smiling face below the jingle bell during dedication, it was believed by many that that was a caricature of the first president of the University of Chicago, William Rainey Harper. And I have a picture of Harper, maybe, somewhere. William Rainey Harper, without whom there would never have been a University of Chicago, looked like this. So with my Photoshop program, I was able to take half the picture of William Rainey Harper and try to fit it onto the face that you see. It did not work out very well, but during dedication, people said, here's William Rainey Harper when he's in a good mood, and here he is when he's angry, because William Rainey Harper was definitely known for having quite a temper. And you can see the angry face by either looking at the back of the column with the smiling face, or looking in between them. Each of the columns has exactly the same features.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is who I discovered it really is. No one has ever printed this before.
That's
I'm
so
waiting for
funny.
my book to come out. And
Known
you
as
won't
who?
recognize it. Sorry?
Known as who?
No, this has not appeared anywhere to my knowledge. I'm waiting for my book to come out, so it will have been published. I made this discovery, no one else did. This was a good 10 years ago. And who is it? It's Henry Ives Cobb, the architect. He threw himself into his work.
How funny.
It just doesn't fit William Rainey Harper.
Uh-huh.
So great, now we don't know who the angry man is. He's just a mystery. That's what you get before dying when you ask your eldest son to make sure that all your personal papers are destroyed, which is apparently what Henry Ives Cobb did. I will never forgive him for that. Okay, we're going to go out into the big dome now. And will the last person close the door? The big heavy doors. The University of Chicago has in the last 15 years spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on restorations. The last work they had done was taking the weather-beaten, old, thick, massy, dark oak doors and refurbishing the outside, so they look beautiful. But if you look above, just above and to the left of the large-winged lion, you'll see the brick there looks much newer and cleaner. They took the terracotta, or not terracotta, they took the Roman brick that faces the building down from the building they demolished below the observatory slightly, our old power plant, and they cleaned them up and rebuilt the tower and the wall. So it looks much nicer than it used to, but you can see what the old, more weathered brick looks like. This hasn't been weathered too much, so it looks more new-ish. Okay, we'll go in. Last person closes the door, and as we go in, be sure to look for the dragon heads greeting us for no apparent reason. I still think that's a good title for a book. Dragon heads. There are 16 of them. We also have 4 angel heads. Here's one of the angel heads. You see that requires you to stand in a corner and one straight up there. The other one that's almost invisible. I myself only discovered the angel's existence about 10 years ago. I was photographing everything. So if you want to see the angel, you have to get close and look right up there in the little triangle. Just a fantastic book. Okay, up we go. I used to say walk this way, and people would shrug and turn around and walk backward. Here's a picture showing the shutters open. Pretty much one giant tree is in the way, so I couldn't show you from the outside, but the shutters now are facing that way. In this picture, they're about 180 degrees rotated facing that way. They are open, making an 11-foot wide opening, 85 feet long. Someone has taken my illustration. I'm going to take a look. You are now looking at the world's biggest lens telescope. In 1897, for the next 11 years, it was the largest telescope of any kind in the world. By 1905, Hale had his new observatory out west on Wilson's Peak, the Mount Wilson Solar Observatory. By 1908, he had made the 60-inch, the 5-foot mirror for a new telescope, mostly paid for by Carnegie. By 1917, he had paid Carnegie had helped pay the difference between what John Hooker had paid and what the telescope cost. Hooker left the project. He felt George Hale was flirting outrageously with his young wife. Hooker was probably absolutely correct. And Carnegie finished paying for that telescope, which got its first light in 1917. And then Hale helped persuade John D Rockefeller to pay for the 200-inch Palomar Mountain telescope. The new one being built by the University of Chicago and a host of others is 80 feet in diameter, will be, which is about the curvature of the railing right here, or halfway between this outermost fence and the wall, all the way around. 80 feet. Today, the biggest telescope in the world is 410 inches, something like 34 feet, if I'm not mistaken. It's in the Canary Islands, at La Palma, jointly owned by Mexico and Spain. And I think the remarkable thing about that is they also purchased a 39-inch refractor. So lens telescopes are not obsolete or obsolescent. They're just not being used as much as big reflectors, which get better resolution. Let me see if I can find that image out. This is a computer-generated illustration of the giant Magellan Telescope with all of its 7 mirrors. And I think you can see the large Magellanic Cloud in the distance too. Close up, it'll look like this. Of course, they'll only have 4 mirrors sometime in the next 5 years. And you can see these images and learn much more about the giant Magellan Telescope by going online. So, 80 feet diameter. No one has a clue as to what new stuff we'll learn. But undoubtedly there'll be new stuff that we had never thought about before, and there will be, of course, great amounts of information about things we thought we already had a pretty good handle on. I am standing on the largest indoor elevator in the world. It's not like an indoor-outdoor elevator found an aircraft carrier, which takes jets from below up to the top deck or outside. This one stays inside. It's 73 feet across. It weighs 37.5 tons. And if I move quickly like this, you can see it shifting a little bit. It's only held up with 4 pair of cables. The cables there are particularly nice because that round tower, you can actually see by looking down the steps here how it turns into a green painted tower. My gut instinct is that this green paint is the original pea green paint referred to in the 1890s when this place was first completed. But you can see the tower down there. Each set of these weighs about 9 tons. A single motor makes all 4 go down, making the 4 go up. It's here purely to carry you to the bottom of the telescope. We used to leave the telescope sideways like this. Would someone with a free hand hand me those 2 images behind you? Yeah, thanks. They'll fall down and try to hit you though. Here's the picture taken in 1921. Harriet Parsons had just gotten her degree in astronomy, and all of the people in this picture, which includes some people known as computers, people hired to do astronomy, are standing behind me facing that way. The photographer is up there near the bright square and circular lights, looking this way, the telescope sideways. At the bottom of the telescope, the 9-foot-long instrument George Hale had invented for photographing the sun without damaging your eyes, which we used to do every single sunny day. That's Edwin Frost behind her, looking almost in profile. I live on Frost Drive, named after him. And directly to Frost's left is Albert Einstein, who happened to be visiting Yerkes Observatory in the year 1921. He was visiting the United States for the first time. He gave 2 talks at the University of Chicago. This is our most popular picture that we sell, not because it's got Harriet Parsons in it, We sell it as an 8 by 10 for $11.95 with identifiers on the back. We also have a 50-cent postcard in it. So you can look more closely at that. Here's a picture taken 6 years later, wearing what to me appears to be much more modern dress from 1927 as young Bill Morgan, who came here from Vanderbilt University, and is being photographed taking the 10,000th picture of the sun. In this picture, the elevator is about as high as the windowsills surrounding us. And the telescope's not too far off the position it is now. Look carefully and you can see wooden chairs up there. These wooden chairs are down there now, but they used to be up there. If you had come for a tour before about 1960, and we were only open on Saturdays back then, because the astronomers' offices are up and down the halls. They don't want to be bothered by people giving the same tour every day. Not that I do the same tour every day. On Saturdays, the tour guide would have led you in here. You'd have been able to look down, much the same way you can look down the steps here, but the floor would have been all the way up. The elevator floor comes down to approximately where my green laser pointer is failing to make a dive. Let's see. Come on, flame on. There we go. From about there and across the pier to about whatever below the wheel there. The bottom of the floor would have been visible to you. The tour guide would have led you up these steps and back. You would have ended up sitting up there where the wooden chairs used to be. At the end of the tour, you probably would have been led down the second set of steps and back out. Men, women, and children before 1960 led up these open areas, which at that time, because the floor is above you, would have meant there would have been up there almost a 4-story drop to down below, which you can easily see by looking over. So at this time, I'd like to answer any questions you might have about life, the universe, or anything. I haven't given you that guess how old Albert Einstein was. 34. No, 42 is the answer to the question of life in the universe. You're going to say that. You got to come. Right over here. This is what we can use to move the floor higher to get to the catalyst hanging from the telescope. The catalyst allows us to move the telescope, turn the dome, move the floor up and down. The desk allows us to do all of those things, but you don't want to simply back to the telescope. You want to be under the telescope and aware of what you're doing.
I thought, are you still using it?
We are not using it for science, but I'm glad you asked that. On any clear night that the moon is not full, we sort of close it down for about a week surrounding the full moon because it's bright enough the sky too much. You can actually sign up to observe through this telescope for $100 per person. You get a 2.5-hour program. 2 years ago, January, we decided we'd try it and see if anybody would pay that much. And in fact, we've had over 2,000 people coming. If tonight is a night for observing, it's clearly going to be not clear.
We were supposed to Saturday night.
Oh, yeah, we're sorry about that. We'll just have to try again.
Yeah.
Will you do me a favor? Make sure the black button to the left of those 4 light switches is pushed hard. Go to your left of that. Yeah, the black button, push it hard. Because I'm going to show you something you normally wouldn't be able to see. I'm going to turn the dome back to where it should be. Normally you wouldn't be able to see me moving the dome, moving the floor, or moving the telescope. I'm the one doing most of the tours. I do every weekday. I get Saturdays off. We have Saturday tours also, but on Saturday tours, they'll move the floor, turn the dome, move the telescope. During my tours, I don't want to be doing anything in case something breaks. If something breaks, your $10 and your $10 won't be enough to pay for it. So I am going to turn the dome back to its normal position, away from the prevailing wind. So we want to get rain. So you got to see some stuff on the I would like to thank all of you for coming today. It's the time of the tour, at which time I ask you to go back downstairs into the gift shop, buy lots of neat stuff. We have stuff for sale here you cannot find pretty much anywhere else in Wisconsin. I'm not just talking about our t-shirts and sweatshirts. Our old sweatshirts and t-shirts had the University of Chicago Yerkes Observatory. The new ones, which only came a few weeks ago, say Yerkes Observatory, Waynes Bay, Wisconsin.
A question before anyone else goes anywhere.
Okay.
What? Okay. Of course we know about the Hubble.
Yeah.
Are there other telescopes in space besides that one?
Well, the Chandra X-ray telescope, for one, is certainly a telescope in space. It's measuring X-rays. Hubble and the new James Webb telescope, which will be launched in the next 5 or 10 years. I don't remember when. The James Webb telescope will be much bigger. Hubble is no longer doing visible light because we have bigger telescopes on Earth that get greater resolution. Using a process called adaptive optics, we can get better images from big telescopes on Earth than Hubble can. So Hubble is now measuring those wavelengths that don't quite make it through the lower damper atmosphere, such as infrared and ultraviolet. It's hard for you to get a suntan on a day like today, right? And you can't feel the heat of the sun coming down either.
The reason I ask that is, why has no one ever thought of either putting it in geostationary orbit, looking at the Earth, or maybe putting a telescope on the moon?
There are
looking at the Earth?
There are plenty of satellites in geostationary orbit that do all manner of things, including weather. You have to be at the right distance so that it's moving exactly how the Earth seems to be
So
spinning.
we do have
they're
telescopes
geostationary.
in...
They're called geostationary satellites. Yes, and the new James Webb telescope will be at one of the Lagrange points, which means it'll be far from Earth, but always, I don't know if it's following it or in front of it, one of those. And it won't have to worry about closing up every it takes an hour and a half to go once around the Earth.
Kind of like that old,
Hubble has to keep closing up so it doesn't get sunlight.
like that old L5 movie,
Yes.
that that's
Oh.
one of those L points, when there
Yeah,
was
one
a
of the
space
Lagrange
colony.
points that has
Yes.
nothing to do with Lagrange, Illinois. So, yeah, there are. And in case you're wondering why we don't put a telescope on the moon, the far side of the moon gets hit by sunlight as often as the near side facing Earth. There are a number of reasons why we don't. That's one of them. Cost being that the thing about adaptive optics is all big telescopes are now designed to use them. If we the new 80-foot diameter telescope being built in Chile will have, I think, 10 times the resolving ability of Hubble. But a small area of space, but that's okay.
You know, thinking about it, it would make perfect sense to me anyway. Why not put a telescope on the dark side of the moon?
The dark side of the moon is fully illuminated exactly as much as the front side.
Yes.
The
Really?
word dark means hidden. I wish everyone knew
The
that.
moon is...
When you look at the moon as a sphere, when you see the moon like this, the back side of the moon looks like this.
So it's only dark from our perspective.
It's only hidden from our...
It's tidally locked, so
During-
one side faces us.
During a new moon, the moon is up there, usually above or below where the sun is. If it happens to line up with the sun, you'll get an eclipse, but you don't see it. It's lost against the blue, bright sky. The far side of the moon at that point is fully illuminated. So, it's something I've spoken...
So there is no such thing as a
A
dark
dark-
side of the moon.
It's a Pink Floyd album.
Yes.
There is, the dark side of the moon is not dark. Africa is not a dark continent. They called it dark because it meant unknown. You've heard of the Dark Ages? There wasn't a whole lot of information about it. It's the unknown. Here's a new word that really irks me. Irk. The word alien does not mean extraterrestrial. There are amazing little creatures called tardigrades that are just large enough to be seen. Under great magnification, they look like little bears, and they have fingers, and I think 6 arms, but don't quote me. And they can survive just about anywhere. They become dormant and can be revived. These creatures and squid and octopi were written up as having alien DNA. By alien, the person did not mean extraterrestrial, but somebody started that idea online. And when I tried to explain it to someone, they said, just look it up. It says they're alien. No, they're not extraterrestrial. It's good old-fashioned, everyday DNA from Earth. They are on Earth. They didn't come from somewhere else. It would be the biggest science story ever if we really had proof of any creature on Earth having extraterrestrial DNA, which is not even likely. Consider
Well, the
mules.
comets and so forth, they introduce certain
They
microbes
can.
that
They can. They
morph
they
the
might.
Earth's
we don't,
atmosphere.
We don't know if they ever have. We don't know if it would survive. Maybe some things. We do know that the building blocks of life, amino acids, have the most common 5 or 6 things in the known universe. Hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, helium, yeah.
Nitrogen.
And if you put them in the right kind of environment, carbon seeks out hydrogen and oxygen, and you get complicated things like ammonia, put a spark through it, and you can get all 24 or 27 of the amino acids that are the building blocks of life. That's not the same as life. It's stuff that makes up life. So it's
like the
common in the
microbes we
universe.
see down in the volcano
Yes.
plumes underwater.
That's right. Those white chimneys and black chimneys are little microenvironments where living creatures have adapted to survive. They didn't necessarily originate there. They probably didn't. They probably floated down. So life on Earth is the only life we know about now. I really get annoyed with, I answer a lot of questions on Quora, Quora, you might want to look that up. Anybody can ask anything, pretty much. I can't believe how stupid some of the questions are. I don't mean to be a snob, but I just feel you don't have to be an astronomer, but you should know the Earth is a sphere. Not round. Circles are round. The Earth is a sphere. And you illuminate spheres in different ways. You completely, perfectly mimic the phases of the moon. Wait till you see the next first quarter moon. It's a quarter of the way through its cycle. It looks like a half moon in the sky. Hold a sphere out from your hand. The sun is there, setting, and the sphere will look just like the moon against the sky. Oh, wait till the sun is just about to set a day before the full moon. You'll see a nearly full moon rising. Your eyes probably won't be able to tell the difference because for about 3 days the moon looks full, but it's only 1 day. Hold a sphere out, and guess what? It's illuminated by the sun setting. Wholly. So you can hold the moon out and hold the sphere out toward the moon. That's what I forgot to mention. Hold the sphere up in the direction of the moon, and the first quarter moon will be half full, just like the moon in the sky. Hold it out in the direction of the moon with the sun behind you, it's fully illuminated. And we end up seeing about 60% of the moon because it's doing this. And watching the phases of the moon should be mandatory for everyone over the age of 10, or maybe 8, or maybe 6. You can go online, just look under phases of the moon, and they'll show you NASA footage of the moon doing this. We end up seeing a little bit more of one side and the other, and the top and the bottom. It's just remarkable. You see it going through its phases, which are roughly 28 days. So a 7-day moon is the first quarter. A 14-day moon is a full moon. 28-day moon, you've got to get up and stay up all night to see it because it's rising at midnight, and it's a half of the moon facing what direction it's set, where the rising sun will be. It's opposite of the first quarter. And then you see, if you see the thinnest possible crescent moon, it's right after sunset. That's moon number day 2 or 3. And then there are all these religious groups that start their religious thing on the first full moon visible with the unaided eye, and they argue about whether you can trust an astronomer to tell you when the full moon really is. What if it's cloudy? You have to wait till the next day you can begin Ramadan, which is based on the full moon. Unless you think that's weird, tell me how the date of Easter is chosen, if you're not Greek Orthodox or some peculiar, interesting group. The date of Easter is
The first full
Sunday
moon
following the first full
after
moon,
spring.
following the vernal equinox. So Christians use, and by Christians I mean Catholic and Protestant and everybody else is one of those. They use the moon in their calendar. If you're Jewish or many other groups, you do also use a lunar calendar. But it doesn't work very well. Thanks for coming. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Tell your friends.
Excuse me, the Webb telescope is named after...
James Webb, who is an important NASA person, not named after anyone from the University of Chicago. And if you see the movie Hidden Figures, someone's portraying him. So please go on to tripadvisor.com and say nice things about us. Really would appreciate it.